We have been created for connection. Because God is love, and because we have been created in the image of the God of love, we've been made for love. Each one of us has been intentionally crafted with a number of different means through which we can love our God and love one another. We've been created to think logically, feel deeply, listen intentionally, remember faithfully, experience bodily, and dream imaginatively, in order that we might know God more fully and become more and more like Jesus. That's where spiritual disciplines come in. Richard Foster writes that spiritual disciplines are intentional practices that give us space to place ourselves before God so that He can transform us. Kurt Thompson writes that they create space within us for God to work. As we engage with our God through these practices, we are being transformed more fully into the image of God. This is the goal of our spiritual formation, Christ-likeness. And as we are being formed by the Holy Spirit, the Spirit seeks to engage our whole self, mind, body, and will. Over these next 9 weeks, we are excited to both learn about and practice together 9 sets of spiritual disciplines. We're eager to see what happens as we create space as a church family for God to work through these disciplines. This week, we are focusing on the spiritual discipline of prayer. Foster writes that prayer is the most central discipline because it ushers us into perpetual communion with the Father. Ruth Haley Barton writes, "The fundamental purpose of prayer is to deepen our intimacy with God." Simply put, prayer is all about how we communicate with God. It is the root of many of the spiritual disciplines that we'll be studying and practicing during this series. But prayer is learned. In Luke 11:1, one of his disciples says to Jesus, "Lord, teach us to pray." And if the goal of these spiritual disciplines is that we become more like Jesus, it makes sense for us to look to Jesus to learn how to pray. First, Jesus made prayer a habit. Throughout his life and ministry, we find Jesus going out early in the morning to lonely places to pray in Matthew 14, Mark 6, Luke 6, and John 6. He also encouraged his followers to have a sacred private place to pray in Matthew 6:6. By setting aside a place and a time to pray, we can help make prayer a regular part of our daily routine. So, what might it look like for you to have a certain place that's set aside as a place of prayer? Perhaps a certain chair in your home or on your back porch, or maybe a trail or walkway near your house. And do you have a time for yourself or for your family that you've set aside to pray? Setting aside a time and a place can help make prayer a habit and can help invite the Lord into our everyday. Jesus also prayed along the way. He models for us prayer without ceasing. While Jesus was going about his day-to-day ministry, he looked to the Father and relied on the Spirit. Before feeding the 5,000, Jesus looks to the heavens and gives thanks, just as he does throughout many of his other miracles. He listens to the Spirit who leads him to Samaria to meet the woman at the well in John 4. And in one of the most poignant moments in all of the Gospels, as Jesus sees his dead friend Lazarus, we read, "And Jesus looked up and he said, 'Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you've always heard me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me.'" Jesus models what it looks like for us to regularly invite the Lord into our day-to-day life and ministry. So, what might it look like for you to do the same? What does prayer without ceasing look like in your context? Finally, Jesus teaches us to pray authentically. We ought to pray to a God who already knows us and sees us as we are. Jesus teaches his apostles in Matthew 6, 7, and 8. "When you pray, don't keep on babbling like pagans, for they think that they're going to be heard because of their many words. Don't be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you even ask him." If one of the goals of prayer is intimacy with God, we can trust God to be our wholehearted selves. We can entrust Him with our darkest fears, deepest struggles, and greatest joys. Here's an initial question to discuss as a class. What are some models of prayer that have been helpful for you throughout the years?